Good evening. Imagine being a fourth grader who lived a rather isolated existence and was told about a faraway place called Disneyland. She had heard exciting things about it, but she really couldn't comprehend the magnitude of such a place. Figuratively speaking, when Ying Ma and her family emigrated to the US from China, she thought she was heading to Disneyland. What confronted her was a far cry from the Magic Kingdom. It wasn't the foreign language and culture that proved the most difficult. Rather, it was the shocking racism, isolation, and disdain that she encountered in our own backyard of Oakland. Ying Ma's story is a perfect example of what made America great. Courage to confront hardship and abuse, determination to move past it, and gratitude to a country that made it possible for anyone to succeed and discover one's self-worth. I highly recommend that you read the personal account of her amazing journey in her book, Chinese Girl in the Ghetto, which she will be selling and signing tonight. Ying Ma has indeed come a long way from the inner city of Oakland. She received her undergraduate degree from Cornell and a law degree from Harvard. She has served as a... Thank you, excuse me. She has served as a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution of War, Revolution, and Peace, practiced law, managed corporate communications at Sina.com, which is the first mainland China-based internet company to list on the NASDAQ, and served on the first professional staff of the Congressional U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. She has also written articles for the Wall Street Journal, the International Herald Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, the Weekly Standard, and others. Currently, Ms. Ma is a senior vice president of SDB Partners, a strategic advisory firm, and she is a policy advisor of the Heartland Institute, a free market think tank. It is my pleasure to introduce Ying Ma.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Rita, thanks very much for that very kind introduction. I want to say thanks to all the volunteers who made this event happen. Special thanks to Rita for all her hard work and coordination in recent months. And Howard, thank you for having me here. It's an honor for me to tell you a bit about my book and my story. But whenever I talk about my book, I have a tendency to think of another author, and that author is President Barack Obama. As you may recall, the liberal media raved about Barack Obama's writing abilities in the 2008 election. Back then, Senator Obama's resume was really quite short, and his supporters often would say, with a straight face, that he was just marvelous because he wrote 2 marvelous books about himself. And at first I thought this was some kind of a joke. But then when Senator Obama actually became President Obama, I realized that it was no joke at all. And I decided that I seriously needed to get with the program and start believing in the dreamy Barack Obama world of yes, we can. So I thought that what I needed to do was to write 2 books about myself, and maybe I too can be President of the United States. So I sat down and wrote a book about myself called Chinese Girl in the Ghetto. When people ask me what the book is about these days, I usually politely tell them that it's about my family's journey from communist China to inner city Oakland, California. And it's about my journey of getting to know freedom. But what I'm really thinking, usually what's really on my mind, is that I need to hurry up and write another book about myself. And when I do, then maybe I can go to all those places that Barack Obama has been able to go. Yes, we can. I'm joking, of course. I was not born in this country, so I can't become president. But Donald Trump sure kept my hopes up for a very long time. He kept telling me and everybody else that Barack Obama wasn't born in this country either. So when Barack Obama finally released his birth certificate in the 2012 elections, I was pretty devastated. All my hopes for the White House were dashed. It's a feeling that I'm sure Senator Marco Rubio will become quite familiar with in 2016. In any case, when it became clear that writing another book wasn't going to do anything for my political ambitions, I decided to focus on telling people about the book that I have written. And I think it's a book that was worth writing for its own sake, and let me tell you a little bit about it. My story is an immigrant story, a legal immigrant story. I was born in China at a time when the country had been devastated by decades of totalitarian communist rule. My family lived in an apartment that had no running water, no modern toilet facilities, no washer, no dryer, and none of the other amenities that we take for granted here in the West. And in fact, we lived in a place that was considered to be quite modern and quite enviable for folks in China, because we lived in a city and we did not have to do back-breaking farm labor. Back then, everyone who could leave China for America wanted to leave. Everyone who couldn't leave wanted to leave too. So when my family had the opportunity to come to America, we immediately took it. We moved to Oakland, California, knowing almost nothing about it. We showed up there because we had relatives and we wanted to be close to our family members. Yet, instead of finding an America where the streets were paved with gold, we found crumbling schools, unsafe streets, and racist people. That was because we had arrived in inner city America, the heart of the welfare state. One by one, the horrors of the ghetto showed themselves to us. Poverty and urban decay plagued our new city. Storefronts had shattered windows. Streets were pockmarked with potholes. Bridges and tunnels were splashed with graffiti. The streets downtown, even near City Hall, were often streets that smelled of urine. Homeless men and women aggressively panhandled, and that was when they were being nice to you, and they accosted tourists and residents alike. Crime plagued our new city as well. Drug dealing seemed much more prevalent at times than employment. Muggings took place in plain sight, and gunshots rang at night, regularly interrupting my TV watching. Racism also ruled my town. Asians, and it didn't matter if we were Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Filipinos, or Japanese, we often only had one name, and that was Chinaman. That was the case at school, on the streets, on the bus, and seemingly everywhere and anywhere. On the sidewalks, teenagers had a habit of entertaining themselves by creeping up behind frail and elderly Asian immigrants and then frightening them by screaming at the top of their lungs their worst imitation of the Chinese language. More often than not, racial slurs were backed by the threat of violence, and sometimes followed by violence itself. And because the racism of the perpetrators simply did not fit neatly into the politically correct narrative that our culture so often prizes, mainstream America paid no attention or simply looked away. In the ghetto, there was a general breakdown of law and order, an overwhelming absence of personal responsibility, and a widespread sense of entitlement. The welfare state was prevalent, and it was supposed to help. It only made the place even more dysfunctional. It provided food stamps, but it could not stem hunger. It offered welfare checks, but it could not promote economic growth or create